to do, right, that are not rocket science, not exotic technology, but things that would contribute greatly to defense. Even things that we know we should do, but don't always get around to doing, or we're stuck with sort of doing something else. So I spent a little time thinking about, wait a minute, if we have a term, then we really got to define it. Well, hey, there's definitions of all types here. What you'll see, and these are just a sample of the ones I've collected over the years, that when people use the term, they rarely define it. They usually say, they'll normally give you a few examples. For example, cyber hygiene is really important. For example, patching. For example, good configurations, that sort of thing. But my view is, if you're going to try and convince a large number of people to take action, think of it as a campaign, in both publicity and in technology, then you need to be specific about it. And so if you glance down here, I'll just mention a couple of highlights. For example, even at the Center for Internet Security, we've had several different definitions. The first example on this page, good hygiene is, making sure we are protected. We're protecting devices appropriately, et cetera. And we have another undefined term, right? So cybersecurity best practices. Well, okay, that's nice, but it's not particularly concrete, right? And there's not an action list in there. We got a little closer with the second bullet on there in the version 6 of the CIS controls. And people use this term, so we adopted it also. The critical security controls 1 through 5 are essential. We talked to them about a strong foundation, et cetera. The third bullet down there, we were a little more rigorous. I'll talk about that in just a little bit, but there are plenty of others. And just again, this is a sampling. The Carnegie Mellon, the Software Engineering Institute, one of the great institutions of this industry, they have a document where they name categories and they do some mapping between the NIST cybersecurity framework and others. ENISA is a European standards organization. They have a survey of European cyber hygiene practices. And one of the ironic things they note is that there's not actually a uniform approach or a standard or a definition. So, okay, so what they do is sort of collect examples. Of course, Wikipedia has to weigh in, and then you see a definition there. There's actually a few academic attempts, right? And if you're going to do an academic study, then you have to start with some notion of definitions and rigor. And the thing, cyber hygiene, the concept, its measures, and so forth, is an example. And again, an attempt to bring some rigor to the thinking and the notion of hygiene and establish its importance. And again, the few others down there, I won't bother to go through them. But the notion was there's no universally accepted way to talk about this other than sort of cheerleading, right? Hygiene is good and everyone should do it. And so we needed to, from our perspective, need to bring a little more rigor under the hood so we could start to then be specific about actions and then what we would measure, so forth. So a couple other thoughts then about this idea of hygiene. I'm sorry. We, for the Center for Internet Security, a lot of this, in fact, everything is really based on the CIS controls in terms of these sort of operational practices. And if you don't know the story, I won't bore you with the whole history, but the 30-second version is the thing that we call the CIS controls. So they really started as an afternoons project with 5 of my friends. And we're sitting around the table in sort of the 2008 or so, and Jess said, our defender friends are overwhelmed, and the most frequent question we get is, how do we get started? What's the basics, right? What are the foundational things we must do? And that was a 2-page letter, sent it to a bunch of friends across the DoD. If you don't know where to begin, start here, based on our experience. Well, that got picked up by the SANS Institute and a think tank in DC called the Center for Strategic and International Studies. In 2009, it became, the original name was the Consensus Audit Guidelines. Most of you know it as the SANS Top 20. And the notion was sound, right? How do I start? And what are the most important things that I need to do? Security is full of, hey, you could do this. Bad guys might do this. You should do that. And that's lovely. But what that leads you to is these infinite action lists, right? You never get finished because hey, security people are pretty clever. They always have a new way to break a system. And therefore, there's more things you can do. But reality has to set in, right? You're not going to do them all. And therefore, we really need to be focused around a smaller number of things, establish things that have both high value and are the foundation for more nuanced and complex defenses later. That's been kind of the spirit behind the SANS 20. That is, study attacks first, right? Rather than speculate about bad guys, let's see what's really going on. And that's what's been available in the last few years that was not available, when I was a kid in the 70s and 80s. We actually knew very little about threats, right? We were more about postulating threats, than observing them or collecting data about them. Today, hey, we're drowning in data about threats, right? Attacks are happening all the time. We get an education from bad guys every day. So least we could do is make some sense out of it and try to do something useful with it. So the last couple steps along the way for the critical security controls was the name that we used. I retired, by the way, from the government in 2012, wound up taking this back over and then spinning it out into its eventual nonprofit home, the Center for Internet Security. So that's really the trademark name for it. But the philosophy has been the same all the way through. It's an attempt to look at these, really this giant fog of all these ideas, right? Attackers, defensive tools, IT, business use of IT, and how do we bring all this together and try to translate it into something that people can actually do? What's the smallest number of things that they really ought to be doing? That's really the notion here, and we've really tried to stay true to that spirit. You can go find all this at cisecurity.org, so I won't go through it. And all you practitioners out there in the audience, there is no rocket science on here, right? This is really about discipline, about operational practice, about putting things in place, what I call the machinery of defense. It's essential that we do this. Defense never ends, right? We wish defense was an event where we win or we don't win, but no, it's more like a machine that runs every day, and some days are better than other days, right? And so the machinery we design for efficiency, for success, and it gets better over time. So these are all the things that are found in the CIS controls. There's another level of detail underneath them. Again, cisecurity.org, you can find all this. But I will point out the categories, the sort of 3 columns on this view graph. Basic, this sort of 1 through 6. Foundational, this is the more detailed, technically more complex, and then sort of organizational is on the right side. And those are really more process-heavy things. This was a useful way to talk about this for the last few years, but it turned out to be really not adequate to the job of helping people get started on day one. So I'll talk about what we've done recently around that. So a couple other thoughts, this notion of cyber hygiene and what we're going to do about them. If we got to really bring rigor to this and try to design a program and a campaign of education and inciting people to action, then what properties would we want it to have? And this is my list. You're welcome to generate your own. But for me, it's about being specific, things that you can describe, right? And the model, of course, is personal hygiene. It's the things that we do in around personal health, around the sort of social behavior that allows us to survive, we hope, as a society. But you don't ask people to understand all the details of medicine and all the issues around viruses and bacteria and how they move and all this kind of stuff and how it's transmitted. You try to translate all that into behavior, right? Things that people can do, that they can understand. And again, it's not that people aren't smart, it's that they are not, their education is not tailored to the details of this very highly technical information. And so you need a way to translate that into action. And for me, the most important verb in cybersecurity is always about translation. So this notion of hygiene is really about, if you look at bullet 3, translating science into specific action and behavior, right? And what you'd really like to do is bullet 4. That is, not just say a few good things that sound right, but make specific statements about them. That is, what effect do these actions in hygiene have specifically against attacks? That's a really important thing that's been really elusive in this business. So we'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. And again, this idea of not everyone will get the same domain knowledge. And of course, again, it's not a list, right? It's not a do these 5 things or an article in Cybersecurity Awareness Month. You really need a whole ecosystem, a marketplace of tools and all that kind of stuff. And the last point I'll make on this one is that at the end, this is always about, again, not a list, but an on-ramp, right? This is about building the machinery of defense over and over again. So you really want it tied to some more comprehensive security program. That's what we're doing here. I will say, I said earlier that our sort of first cut at thinking about partitioning the controls was missing something, and we added that something in version 7.1, and we call them implementation groups. And I won't go through them all. This is documented on our website, but the one to look at is implementation group 1. It was really designed to meet this need for hygiene, right? What are the smallest number of things? Be specific, make it within range of small companies that don't have big security staffs or lots of money for tools, yet need to get started. And so you'll see a lot of our literature at CIS reference this notion of implementation groups as the definition of basic cyber hygiene. So, this is our attempt to at least be consistent in the way that we talk about this problem. That's been released, and this document just came out, I believe, this week, the community defense model. When I talked about this translation issue, this is the way that we do it, and we just published our methodology for this recently. And so the idea of this community defense model, again, this is not rocket science, this is just a description of a way to think about and take action on this problem, is these are the elements of it, right? You need data, right? We want to base our decisions on data. You know, we all have a dream, right? Someday we'll make decisions based on data in this business. But you can't deal with the millions of data points of badness. You need to abstract that into some kind of model. You know, some way to say, wait a minute, there's not a million unique attacks happening every minute. They actually fall into a relatively small number of types or classes or atomic elements of action or things like that. And so we need to have those kinds of things work together. From there, then we have the ability to translate that into action. So if you look at this paper, and again, I recommend it to you, you'll see what we use as the sources, and just for our first cut on through this, was the Verizon data breach report. We work closely with their team, excuse me, at the large scale information that they collect and then translate. If you look at, you might know that the Center for Internet Security is also home of the Multi-Stake Information Sharing and Analysis Center. So we have lots of data that we collect around the security in state, local, tribal, and territorial governments across the US, and others have been brought into this. The model that we use specifically is the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which has really taken off here in the industry and has become kind of the universal way to talk about the lowest level, or you might call them atomic elements of attack, right? The tactics and techniques, you know, specifically the techniques that are used that are composed together. And so when you look at the data, what you're seeing is, well, what are the most important things that are happening? What's real life telling us? From there, you're saying, well, can I represent classes of those attacks, right? The most frequent or the most important in a universal, repeatable way? Well, that's the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And then from there, we do this translation. We look at that relative to the lowest level of the CIS controls and map all that together. And so that we can make a statement that says, you know, for example, for the most common types of attacks, or we call them patterns, as expressed in the MITRE ATT&CK framework, here's the kind of coverage you get through these actions as found in implementation group 1. And so I invite you to go read the paper, get the conclusions, or you can ask questions about that later. But the good news is our intuition is pretty good. That is, there's very high value to foundational basic steps of defense. And so I think, you know, anyone who's thought about it knows that, but we've never had a way, at least from CIS, to express that before. And so this is our way to do that. So a couple other thoughts. And with that, I'm going to wrap up my introductory part of this and turn it over to Randy Marchani. And Randy's been, you know, one of, again, great citizens in this business for a long time, but he also has some of the most interesting security problems to work in the business. So I'll turn it over to Randy. Randy, off to you, please.
Thanks a lot, Tony. Let's see, I'm going to, hopefully, I think I'm clicking in here and I've got it. Yes, I do. And of course, in the classic online mistakes you make, you click ahead of time. I've used this slide here a lot, and it's kind of funny. Listening to Tony, I was kind of going back in memory lane because I was involved in a lot of this stuff at the very beginning as well. And in 2001 or so, SANS actually wrote a top 10 internet threats document back then, which evolved into the top 20. But another interesting thing when he was talking about just a few minutes ago was, you know, we've been kind of chasing our tail for the last 20-some years. An interesting project that I worked on back then was top 10 security mistakes that people make. And I pop that slide up every now and then, and I look at it, and we have not fixed a single one of those in the last 20-some years. Things like, you know, simple things like patching, like passwords, like leaving your file shares open to the world when they shouldn't be, and you know, stuff like that. And yet we've spent millions of dollars. We've built a multi-billion-dollar cybersecurity industry, and we've not been able to completely eliminate 10 security mistakes that were made back in 2001. So you know, it comes down to this following the steps, the basic hygiene stuff that we talk about, which again, this particular slide I've been using for probably the last 7 or 8 years, and it had nothing to do with the current health crisis we're in today, but sure seems like it's apropos. There are simple things that we can do in the short term that are going to be inconvenient, but in the long term, they will you know, get us where we need to go. So one thing that was very interesting with this was, let's see if I can grab my control again, was when we looked at the attacks, and the MITRE attack model is a great place to start linking this all together. And what does all of this have to do with the controls? Well, really what we're doing is we're linking all these threats that we've seen over time, and you know, categorize them, and then use the controls as a bridge to help us solve them, address those problems. But in the 30 years that I've been doing cybersecurity stuff, and here at Virginia Tech, I like to tell people I'm not the CISO of just a corporation. I'm the CISO of a small city. We have our own power plant. We have our own police. We have residential sections. We've got, you know, public places that people come to. We have food areas. You know, everything that you'd find in a small town, every university campus has. And so when we analyze the attacks that we've seen here at Tech in the last 30 years, what do hackers do? It turns out they really are only doing three things, in my opinion. The first thing is they're after data of some sort, whether it's your personal data, corporate data, or research data. They're after your data, and they want to steal it. They want to disclose it, whether it's you know, for a fee or just to embarrass somebody. You know, they want to do that. So they're after your data. You know, those of you that know me, you know that I've said for years that there are no device breach notification laws. There are data breach notification laws. And so they're after your data. The second thing is they want to use your site, your machines, to attack other sites. This is the attribution problem that you know, that we all have issues with. And attribution, this is one of those things that requires teamwork. If every link in the chain has adequate logs and keeps them for a long enough period of time, attribution is a little bit easier. But they want to use your machines to attack other sites. The bot networks. You know, now in the 2010s and the 2020s, we call them bots, right? And back in 1999, in the mid 90s, when Mixter first proposed this thing, you know, it was just called distributed denial of service, DDoS. But they want to use your machine to attack other sites. And then the third thing is, once they've stolen your data, if they really want to cripple you, they'll destroy it. They'll delete it, and depending on how thorough they are, they may delete the originals as well as the backups. But these are the three things that they're after. These three things are addressed by almost all of the 20 critical security controls there. A quick side note: ransomware is not new. Ransomware, the first attack that I know of, was back in 1989. What made it popular is the very simple fact that the payments process is anonymized through Bitcoin. In 2009, the state of Virginia's prescription monitoring database was hit with ransomware. The hackers demanded $10 million. You know, and you put $10 million in small bills, that's a nice size, you know, box. But if that had happened today, where you do the $10 million like Bitcoin, completely different thing. So you want to defend accordingly. And this is part of our hygiene structure here, okay? So let's see if I can click it through. So what we have here is, again, what are the targets? Lance Spitzner, good friend of Russell's and Ives, and a great guy and SANS instructor, pretty much brought security awareness to SANS' attention all by himself. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this. This is a poster that you can download from the SANS site. The web page is shown there at the bottom. But the reason why I want to show this is because, especially now that we're in a work from home environment, a lot of the critical security controls do make some sense on how to approach it from an architectural standpoint. But the point is that you're the target, not the computer so much. I get to your data. I get to steal your data. I get to steal your machine. I get to do all of that through you. You know, patching and things like that, yeah, that's some of it. But, you know, why go through all that trouble? Why waste all that time when I can send you an email and get you to give me your username and password? You know, or call you up, you know, all these different ways of phishing. But you see the different classes of attacks that can happen. against you. And again, the critical security controls give you a way to sort of deal with this type of threats. When upper management says, well, what can they do to us? You can show them something like this, and away we would go. Okay. So let's see here. We got a little delay. Getting here. Make sure that I'm in. And so one of the things here. Let's see. Who's got control? I always like to do this here. There we go. So work from home and the critical security controls. Okay. From a defending standpoint, in the corporate world, in our world as well, as doing cyber defense for the university, we always like to know where our assets are. But as we moved out into work from home, our assets are now under a different IP address space. They're under an ISP's control. They have, for us to get some visibility, certainly we can put agents on the endpoints, but that's not going to give us the type of visibility that we enjoyed when all the assets were inside our address space. So some simple things that we ran into a couple of years ago, I actually ran into this with a homework assignment with the class that I was teaching. I had a target machine on campus in the lab that the students were supposed to run Nessus scans and other vulnerability scans against them. And I had a bunch of students that would say, I can't get to it, the machine. And I checked my firewall, host-based firewalls and all that, and I could get to it. And then one of them came in and said, well, I could get to the machine from campus, but I couldn't get to it from home. And we did a little bit of investigation, and it turned out that the local ISP that student was using from their home saw these packet patterns and assumed that machine was attacking a machine at Virginia Tech, and they blocked it. So you have to take into account ISP posture. What is their posture for this type of information going in and out? And realize that, one of our biggest things for a defensive standpoint was we would find a machine and we would kick it off the net. Well, we can't do that now if the machine's at home. That address space is not under our control. So critical security control number 1, which is inventory of your hardware devices. This changes how you can approach that particular control. You have to look and see how these things are these situations. And if you're like us, we have I don't know, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 12,000 employees. Some of them live close to campus, but some of them live 40, 50, 60 miles away and make that commute. And so you've got lots of ISPs, multiple ISPs all around that may be affecting how you can inventory those assets, okay? And so network traffic visibility, that's another one of those things that we need to check out, okay? And what type of logs are you gonna need? You might not get the network logs that you need from an ISP, but that increases your reliance on endpoint logs. So what you see in Control 5 and Control 6 can affect what you've got there. Okay. Let's see. So Matt Swan, and if you download this slide deck, in the notes section of the slide deck, I put the reference links to these diagrams. But Matt Swan created his version of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but this is the hierarchy of internet incident response. And you start down here at the bottom. When we're implementing, I approach this the critical controls problem from a operational standpoint. We're implementing them, and so if I'm looking at this from incident response, starting at the bottom, inventory. Can I name the assets that we're defending? Well, that's Control 1. That's Critical Security Control 1, inventory of assets. Visibility across the network. That's a bunch of controls, some of which would include vulnerability management, log management, those type of things. Detection capability. Can you detect unauthorized activity? Again, there's one of the controls for that. Can you classify the attack? Is it malware? Is it web-based? Is it a patch problem? Who are the adversaries and their capabilities? And then what type of activities triggered their detection inside your environment? And once you know that they're in, can you find them? And then hunt them down? And then can you follow them around? Can you have that capability? And then what's your action? What's your response action there? So the 20 critical controls, you weave these into this hierarchy here, and you can get something like this, where these guys here are in the hygiene part of the talk, right? What are we doing? What type of things do we have? How do we detect it? What was our posture to begin with? And then the middle section there is, detection. How can I identify where they're coming from? And then, of course, you want to act on something when you see it happening. Okay? So one way that this is just a little process diagram that I like to show the students when I teach the critical controls class is, every sysadmin, I came from the sysadmin world. I was a sysadmin for 30 some years, and so, I have that sysadmin mentality sometimes. And so this is one of those things, right? You install the operating system, you install the patches, you install the applications, you install the patches, you install your localization scripts, you run those, and you do that. And the one thing that's missing is what I call a security configuration script. And so in this sample workflow here for control number 5, which is a secure configuration of your workstations and servers, you have the requirements. You have your regulatory requirements. Is it CUI data? Is it HIPAA? Is it PCI? Is it, what is it? Is it some regulatory thing? The GLB, rules. And then the bridge between those standards and the rubber meets the road commands, that's where the critical security controls fall in place. There's where I can say, okay, how do I map this standard to an actual control, which will then map to, in my example here, a CIS benchmark. And then the CIS benchmarks have the rubber meets the road, the actual commands, whether they're Windows or web or Unix systems. That's where you get the actual commands to build this security configuration script. And then once you build that script, then you have, well, the old term used to be gold disk. You have this image for endpoints. You have this image for servers and applications. So this is just an example of a workflow that we got there. And then the last couple of things that I want to talk about here has to do with just the way to map the critical controls to this hierarchy that we're talking about of needs. I've heavily modified this particular diagram. When I found it, it had an old version. I think it was version 5 of the controls. But again, if you go by severity levels, from the red being your high severity, this is really critical, we're hosed if we get hit, if it's of this severity, then here are some of the controls that we thought would fit in this category. This is a up to you type thing, but as starting point, these are examples. High severity, these controls. Medium severities, low, medium and low, and then any other controls that are outside the scope of the critical security controls. So this is a thing here. The last thing I want to mention is this is a long-term project. You cannot do this, in my opinion, unless even in a small mom and pop, minimum 2 or 3 years. Average is going to be about 5 years, because you have to find out where all the data is. Sometimes you have to go across departmental borders, and there's going to be some politicking, and you may not have the data you need, and they may think you're spying on them. There's a lot of non-technical stuff that you're going to have to do to get the data that you need to help you implement these controls. So, and then with that, I'm going to hand it over to Russell.
All right, thanks, Randy. I remember a long time ago when someone says, hey, Russell, do you and Tony and Randy want to get together and talk about the controls? Of course, the answer was yes, and it certainly has been a great conversation that we've had. A couple things that I want to highlight have to do with creating and sustaining this momentum. what are ways that you can leverage the things that Tony talked about and Randy talked about, and we'll answer with your questions at the end as well, to recognize that this is a way to prioritize your work. Former CISO myself, I've never worried about, was my team busy? The thing that concerned me was, were they working on the things that mattered the most? And this, as Tony described earlier, can in fact be a on-ramp to making sure that we're working on the things that matter the most, especially by focusing on the first 5 controls, the cyber hygiene, and getting beyond just talking about it, but actually doing it, making projects, getting funding, reading the fine manual, whatever the work might be, to start, create, and sustain that momentum is really how you get to win at this. And it's something that is within your reach, and we'll give you some tools and some ways to think about how you can do that coming up here. The first tool to look at here from dear friends, James and Kelly Tarala from Enclave Security and Audit Scripts, and such a delight to be able to work with them on this, is to, you can go to their website and right now download a tool where you can manually assess what's your level of maturity. This concept of what are the different phases of maturity? Are we just getting started? Or are we more optimized at doing those list of things that are called for in each of the controls? And the fascinating thing about this is the same questions. So there's questions behind this. There's other tabs that list all the questions. So it turns out control 1 is not one thing. There's 8 things. And we'll ask you, how well are you doing those 8 things that will help score and determine how well is your organization in this moment at control number 1. And this sample example that's shown here, this idea that, out of all the good things that you should do, about halfway there, to show that level of maturity. And a great resource, and I will paste into the, I'll make the resource available there with respect to how to go and find this and how to use this and how you might make this available. Again, free resource to be able to do that. And when we do this work with Enclave Security, this is exactly the same model that we use. We use the same tool. We go to the same website, download this, and start asking questions. Show me that you're doing this. Show me how you are doing inventory of hardware and software. Talk about scanning. Talk about the configs. Talk about admin access. And one of the key areas we do is focus on where, in this example that you're seeing here on the bottom left, on the percentage by the controls, where there are gaps, or maybe we want to be the eternal optimist like me, where there's opportunities to fill in those gaps from, say, 54 up to 100 for control 1, or looking at those areas. That's where we want to focus our time. Even a good score that you see right here, we want to not think of this as gold-plated security, but instead thinking of it as doing the things that are mapped to actual known attacks. In many cases, can be completely automated. So you set up automation, set up a script, set up some way to know that right away, and you don't have to copy and paste and look at different screens and export and do all that type of work. But to help use this as a baseline. How well am I doing the first time? What's my score? What's my maturity rating? And you're not chasing a score, but the score can be reflective of how mature, how good, how disciplined have you and your organization been at being able to do these good things, these things that we label as hygiene. And the goal is not to just do the easy things, but to do the things that make a big difference, and that's exactly what we're asking you to do here. One of the unique things here as well, one of the gaps that we see a lot of companies falling into is reporting this information to the business areas. What can be helpful in non-tech, non-cyber language to make sure that we're providing this value and communicating that in a way that our business leaders, our board of directors, our audit committees might be able to understand, to say, here's where we are, but perhaps we're not satisfied. And as a good cyber practitioner, you're probably never satisfied, but to cast vision for what would it look like to focus and improve and address these areas from a tool that, again, does not cost you a single thing. Great way to cast vision, especially as you leaders out there cast vision for what could be and what would it look like to improve and do this on purpose and by design. Another resource that I think I just clicked on, yep, another resource from the same source, James and Kelly, here to look at when you do these good things. Turns out we've put together a master mapping spreadsheet. When you do these good things, and just got a couple of them highlighted here, but for every known compliance initiative that we're aware of, we've got a mapping that says when you do control one, here's a place where on NIST 853 and cybersecurity framework, and there's PCI, there's HIPAA, there's all the things that we can imagine that we know about that says when you do these good things, you also get to satisfy the compliance requirements that you have. What I'm seeing, a lot of companies don't have just one, but have multiple compliance initiatives. Maybe you're a publicly traded company. Maybe you take credit cards. Maybe you're in healthcare. So you got that combination of all of those. Here's a tool that doesn't cost you anything. You don't have to go buy a governance risk compliance tool or relational database that does that mapping for you. Again, freely available. And you perhaps could use that to demonstrate, hey, not only are we doing these things that are mapped to known attacks, cyber hygiene, and using the metaphors, using the language that we've used in this conversation today, but be able to demonstrate to your organization that, oh yeah, by the way, we've got to do these things anyway. Here's how we can do them. And in most cases, do that in an automated fashion. It can save you money on a governance risk compliance tool or make you understand the tools that you have a little bit easier. And the goal is to help do this and create momentum for your compliance programs to be easier for you to do. And that's the goal. The goal is to make it easier, make it compelling. Again, that on-ramp mentality with respect to how well can we do these good things? How can we get the most out of our teams, our projects, our programs, such that we're delivering value to our respective businesses? So highly encourage you to have that. And once I get through talking, I'll provide a link to how to access that information. Again, free of charge. Love for you to take advantage of that if you've not already. Next one is, okay, well, I'm excited about this. What can I do about this? Well, again, I want to arm you, equip you with some resources, and I'll make these links available to you, again, once I quit talking, because I'm so excited about it. On the left-hand side, when I first heard Tony and others talking about the controls, and Sans did a big campaign many years ago, over 10 years ago, around the controls, the impact they have on different organizations. One of the things that I did, and I was a team of one, I was the security department. And in the security department, I was very inspired by actions that I've heard from large organizations, government agencies, overseas organizations who applied themselves towards solving for these controls and the positive benefits, almost immediate benefits that they had from that. But I didn't have any money. I was the security team. So one of the things that I did is available on the SANS website to show how I solved for the controls several years ago. Matter of fact, it was 10 years ago, to solve for these controls by reading the fine manual. What were the tools that I had that in many cases had options available that were disabled by default, that when I enabled them, I was able to successfully be able to know the status of many controls, and all that information's out there, freely available, and actually practical ways to do that. What was one of the examples? One of the examples I saw was the antivirus tool or the anti-malware tool, or these days we call it endpoint detection tools or endpoint security tools. It had an option that if I just simply first read the manual and then check the box, it would, with system level privileges on all the workstations and all the servers that had that piece of anti-malware solution on it, it would do an inventory of all the software that was installed on that system. The capability had been there for a long time. I had to think, what's a way that I can solve for control 2 in a way that is subject to my budget constraints? Again, thinking of ideas to do that. A few years ago, Tony reached out and said, hey, Tony, that paper is getting kind of old in the tooth. It's not been updated in a while. Would you mind if we, or they at CIS, were to update that and give more thinking, more options, more ideas, more examples of other folks who have wanted to solve that problem without a large budget, without a large team? And on the right-hand side is a screenshot towards it. And we'll provide that link there's a webcast where Tony and I and others talk about what would it look like with updated methods and updated tools to solve that same problem as a means to help me, as a means to help you make it easier to start a movement in your organization to make sure that you're able to do this as well. The truth is, we want you to get better. The truth is, we want this for you. We want you to become inspired, especially on Friday afternoon, thinking about what are the things that you might do to be a leader, to be a rock star at your organization by implementing or improving these, or maybe there's been projects in the past that you want to resume those in your organization. This can be your playbook, and these are things that are absolutely and without a doubt inside your reach. So those are all the comments I have, and again, I'll start pasting things in the chat window so you can have a reference to the documents that we talked about, and hopefully you can find useful in your respective organization. All right, Tony, that's all I got.
All right, thanks, Russell. Appreciate that. Yeah, that's how Russell and I connected through this his original paper, the no budget implementation. And I'm guessing he's not the only person in the industry that's had to face that, right? Really starting without much. And so, to his credit, he turned his challenge into something that could help lots of other people. So, just to kind of summarize the discussion so far, though, so Russell really, I think, highlighted beautifully the holistic machinery, I will call it, of cybersecurity, right? It's not an event, it's not a buy a thing. You have to connect, make good choices about what to do. You have to do it, and you have to measure and report and work the management issues and the education issues and pull all this together in a way that it provides for and drives ongoing improvement. And that is one of the most important lessons that I think anybody could have in this industry. Randy talked a lot about kind of these practical issues, right? I mean, I often use Randy as my worked example. The guy at the university is running BYOD, long before it was cool, right? Just this flood of students and all the complexity of issues with the faculty and the laboratories, all that kind of stuff. And really, Randy's always full of great practical advice around the things that you need to do. But also, through that discussion about the pyramid and the hierarchy, I think nicely connected. Hygiene is not like a thing that you either do or you don't, right? It's really the foundation for all kinds of things. So if you want to do, there's a temptation to say, let's forget all that hygiene stuff. Let's just go buy some exotic technology and a really fancy threat feed, and we'll go after the real bad guys. Well, if you have no visibility, control, ability to make changes and detect changes in your environment, good luck with all that fancy stuff. You got nothing, right? So you have to connect all that. They're not separate problems. They are connected problems. I think Randy really brought that together beautifully. And then to summarize, I gave a little background on kind of how this idea all came together, but also offered what we think from CIS is a more rigorous view of hygiene based upon our community defense model. And we are on a campaign at CIS. We want to bring more data, more rigor, more repeatability, and transparency to the way we make recommendations, right? And to do that, so that's available to folks like you to help you with that. So we'll be happy to take your questions. I didn't see any appear in the questions window. Hey, please jump in. I'm guessing among the three of us, we probably have over 100 years of experience. So don't hesitate to take advantage of the group that you got here. Go ahead, Carol.
Hi, Tony. Yes, I do have several questions that have come in. So I'll go ahead and start with those, and of course, then pass it back to you. This first question is for Randy. As at university, how do you address the security issues when there is pushback in the name of academic freedom?
Go, Randy, go.
So, yeah, welcome to the real world. Academic freedom is, so the way we framed it was, we said, look, in our world, you're doing groundbreaking research, and you have a methodology, you have the data, and you publish. And if somebody, let's suppose that you and I are in the same field, we're competitors, and I have no scruples at all, and I manage to steal your data and your methodology, and I publish it first, whose is it? And so you frame the argument in that type of a context to let them, see why we're doing this. The other thing too is, and we struggle with this for a long time, but I think we finally are getting it. IT cannot be the department of no. The challenge for us is to try and come up with a security architecture that regular people can use. An IT person coming in saying you have to have severely complex passwords and all this, that's not going to happen. And so you have to take the time to go out and understand how they do things. And so it's a challenge for us. I mean, we have a small group, 7 people, but we do what we call security reviews, and we had to cut back on those for a while because, again, we didn't have enough staff. But a security review, we'd go out and we'd spend some time with the department, with the researcher, and we just say, show us what you're doing. And you know, when we see, you know, we go, well, why are you doing it that way? Well, I'm doing it that way because the IT people say we have to go through this round, and it's kind of stupid. And then sometimes you go, well, the reason why they're doing it is because of this, or sometimes you go, yeah, you're right, it is kind of stupid. So it really is involved in, you got to go out as the IT person and ask them, how are you doing things? And there's nothing an academic loves more than to teach somebody how to do something. And then always, as Russell and Tony know, I have another saying. I say, never waste a breach. So when a breach happens, then you can, you know, it's no longer theoretical, it's an action.
And Randy, if I can tack onto that,
Yeah.
you talked about this, the idea of becoming the Department of No, like NO, no, you cannot do that.
Yes.
Turning that around and being the Department of KNOW, being able to know what the business wants to achieve and how you can help partner with them to help get there.
Right. Absolutely.
All right, thank you both. The next question asks, the CIS mappings down to the subcontrol level are not yet complete for the 800-53 Rev 5. Do you have a timeline goal for that work?
This is Tony. I'll jump on that. I don't write offhand. We are working on that. In fact, we're one of the commitments we made at CIS is to cross map from our work to basically everything else we can find, right? That's our responsibility to provide that. So I don't know the status of that one right offhand. If someone wants to reach out to me, you can contact us at cisecurity.org. That work is done, you know, in our closed social media platform known as Workbench. And if you want to bring some ideas to the table and participate in that, one of the things I remind people about CIS, there is no mystery think tank or giant building full of people, right? We're more like community organizers. So we have lots of great volunteers from around the world that really create that content. The mapping for that particular one is of course quite complex because that's the granddaddy of them all. But I don't know right offhand, but I'll be happy to track that down if someone wants to reach out to me afterwards. But rest assured, we are committed to making the cross mapping from our work to everything else that we can find and back again as transparent, public. You know, we give it to you as we can do that. Thanks.
All right, thanks. The next
one thing to add. Let me add one last thing. What Russell was talking about, the sites at auditscripts.com. There is another spreadsheet at that site that maps a wide variety of U.S. and Canadian and international regulations, controls, everything ranging from PCI to HIPAA 853 to the NSA. It's a master mapping map that we can use, that you can use, and it's all available. Again, it's another free option that you can download.
All right, thanks. The next one asks, does the CIS controls master mappings speak to GDPR or CCPA?
They don't, this is Tony again, they don't directly. We're working on really a strategy for how to manage those different privacy schemes and regulations that are out there. But we have written, there's an older version, we have the privacy companion of controls. We're in the process right now, we're in the work process for version 8 of the controls, and privacy will be addressed. We're just not quite sure how to do that yet. If you have any specific questions about that, though, again, reach out to us. And you know, one of the challenges with privacy issues is that it's kind of a moving target right now, and there's different sort of strategies and different schemes, and we just haven't figured out a way to make this sort of universally applicable. But we know people have to worry about that. We'll find a way to address it, perhaps like we did in the previous version with this sort of privacy companion that helps you not sort of map one for one to the regulations, but structure your technical strategy in a way that supports those privacy regulations.
All right, thanks. Does CIS have automation scripts and GPOs to automate security configurations? Can those scripts or GPO templates be edited and customized to fit our company environments?
Yes, as a matter of fact, specifically for our, so the CIS best practices portfolio includes the CIS controls and then the CIS benchmarks. And so the benchmarks are the configuration items, right, for individual pieces of IT and the technology that makes up the IT. The controls are at the next level up of kind of operational practice. One of those practices is you should manage to a configuration, right, a vetted, trusted, managed security configuration. That's a bedrock must-do principle. That was an observation from my NSA days. People that did that, had the potential for good security. People who did not do that, frankly, were doomed. And so, yeah, if you contact us at CIS, we have the a support model that allows you to take what we've done. The basic content of the CIS benchmarks is released to the public. A membership model supports the company and allows things like this sort of structured tailoring, measurement, and that sort of thing. Some of that you can get through other commercial tools that, and we work with those vendors to make sure that they are faithfully representing the work of CIS in their tool line. But again, we can point you to folks that can explain that in great detail.
All right, thanks. Another one came in. It says, when getting pushback on the importance of reviewing logs, what would be the best way to frame the importance? I usually hear that they would need a lot more people to review logs and not get anything else done.
Yeah, I'll start with that. I'd say that one thing, a strategy to think about that one is, we all have compliance that makes us keep our logs. What are ways that we can set up maybe scheduled searches or alerts when something happens or doesn't happen, and alert our security operations team or alert our team, an idea where we can set up some alerts and then be able to know in the future whenever those conditions happen that don't require someone looking in or logging into a system or kind of hunting, pecking around for any type of event ID or a log condition that's in place. So as much as possible, being able to automate those and get some value from those tools that you probably already have is really the direction we like to see folks focus in for Control 6.
Yeah, and one of the other things too is, if there is an incident, you need to know what happened, who did it, when did they do it, how did they do it, and you need to understand a lot of that to figure out where the hole was in your architecture, but also to demonstrate that you've got a handle on the situation. Cyber insurance may have a requirement that you have logs in place, a login standard and things like that. You might not be able to get cyber insurance if you don't have those pieces in place.
All right, thanks. That's all the questions I see submitted. From what I understand, you guys have some closing thoughts you'd like to share.
Yeah, let me just do a quick thought here to summarize my thinking on this. Hygiene, as I've said at CIS, is a term that's used a lot. We're trying to bring some more rigor to it. Now, I really want to emphasize to the audience the importance, right? This is non-trivial stuff. It's not easy to get these things done, but they're so foundationally important to the way we both put defense in place and manage them. And to do these things well also tells you a lot about your operational management, right? In addition to security, your ability to have good visibility, manage configurations, know who has administrative privilege, know that your defenses are turned on, know that logs are being collected. There's a whole host of things that go with this. So it is really the foundation for defense, provides you tremendous value. Go look at our CDM paper, as I referenced earlier, and allows you then, as you either get more mature or you move into areas where your business is more at risk, it provides the basis to build upon. So you won't start over, believe me, if your situation changes. In fact, you'll now have the power to move into more complex, more nuanced defenses if that's appropriate for you. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, just going along with the cyber hygiene thing, it really, if you get the backing of your upper management, it is a long-term thing. Like I said, this 3 to 7 years, depending on the size of your organization. and how committed, you know, your upper management is to helping you out. But in the long run, you know, it saves you lots of time. It saves you lots of angst to have these controls in place, and you know, you're doing the best that you can to play defense. And you know, there are lots of free tools that you can get that are out there that you can use to help you do stuff. Russell's the things that he was showing, you can build dashboards and say, hey, this department is this far along and this department is lagging. So you can take advantage of the controls to help you with the politicking inside your own organization.
And just a couple things that I'll say as well, the idea of, you know, stories or analogies or metaphors a lot of times can help cyber be easier for our non-cyber things like our executives and our board and our auditors understand if they're not familiar with it. One comes to mind, you know, the dentist who says, you know, hey, you know, Russell, only floss the teeth that you want to keep. I think it's an effective way to kind of hook into that cyber hygiene that says, you know what, that's true. I'm only going to do that for the ones. Of course, I want to keep them all, but that concept of trying to apply that. Or, you know, we're not traveling as much as we used to, but I'm in Atlanta, and the headquarters for Delta Airlines is somewhere south of where I live. And that concept of, you know, when you get on a plane and you look to the left and you see the pilot and co-pilot, they've got radar, they've got communication, they've got all the things that they have to start the engines, to get me from Atlanta to wherever I don't get to go right now. And we never question them, how do they have that and how do they need that? It's just, you know, whatever they need, we want them to have it. We want them to have redundant systems to make sure that my flight from Atlanta to wherever I go next can be done and get me there and all the other passengers safely. And it speaks to that visibility that Randy mentioned earlier. What are the visibility gaps that you have? What are the places where you can't see and know and have that assurance and ultimately sleep well at night? We believe wholeheartedly that the controls, focusing especially on the first 5, can help you address your visibility gaps, apply some automation, and you give you much more sense of the status of cybersecurity in your respective organizations.
All right, well, thank you so much, Randy, Russell, and Tony, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.